All right, call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Can you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, can we get roll call?
Please note that Commissioner Johnson is excused this evening, so we have Commissioner Gill,
Here.
Commissioner Jamu,
Present.
Commissioner Perez,
Here.
and Chairperson Condit.
Here. Is there any conflict of interest from the commission? Seeing none, we'll move on to citizens' communication. While the Planning Commission welcomes and encourages participation in the Planning Commission meetings, adopted rules allow no more than 5 minutes for expression on non-agenda items, matters under the jurisdiction of the Series Planning Commission, and not on the posted agenda may be addressed by the general public. However, California law prohibits Planning Commission from taking action on any matter which is not on the posted agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Planning Commission. Citizens are entitled to address the Planning Commission on any agenda item subject to the 5-minute provision. Is there any members of the public that have public comment? Mr. Warren?
Good evening, Commissioners. John Warren, City of Ceres. I've mentioned this to the City Council any number of times about the audio in this building. But I've never made a request to the Planning Commission group. There's no reason we as citizens can't sit more forward in this room like we did pre-COVID. During pre-COVID, this stand was right up here where that plug is. And the chairs were here and some of the other benches were on the sides for some of the staff members. And there's no reason why we can't go back to that situation. It makes it a lot easier to hear the commissioners and the city council members. Each one of these stations that you're sitting at in chairs has a microphone. And each one of those microphones makes it terrible for us sitting back here in the audience to hear. When Ann was speaking just now, I couldn't understand a word she said. And so my thought is, if you only have a half a dozen people attend the meeting, there's no reason we can't sit up here where we can hear better. A lot of times you as commissioners kind of talk to each other a little bit, okay? Which is, you're supposed to be talking to us. We're supposed to be able to hear you because we're the public. And that's what we're here for, to have a public meeting. So it's not like you guys talking to each other up there before you make a decision. It's you talking to us as the audience and telling us what your thoughts are. And we need to be able to hear that. So there's no reason why we can't sit forward in this room, okay? I know the mayor is afraid someone's gonna come and beat him up there. That's why he put the signs, well, employees only can be up in this front area. But I don't think you folks are afraid of us here. I'm 78 years old and I left all my weapons at home. Thank you very much.
Leah, is there anything we can do, or is that a council decision as far as the setup of the chambers?
I'll have to confer with the city manager. I can't imagine that they have a say, like, we are two different meetings, but I'm just going to run it by someone and hopefully we have it worked out for the next.
Okay, thank you. All right, next.
Good evening, planning commissioners, staff, and ladies and gentlemen. Milt Treeweiler. I was born here in Stanislaus County. I've lived here all my life. And we have a very serious issue here in Stanislaus County. It's hard to understand, but there are people in Stanislaus County who are scheming to destroy the future for our children and our descendants. Their plan is to build more houses to bring in Bay Area people to live in Stanislaus County. This farmland in the MID and TID irrigation districts in Stanislaus County is the best farmland in the world. Once you build houses on it, this farmland, you'll never be able to grow food on it again. This would be irresponsible, and our children and descendants would have to suffer for the bad decisions we're making today. We're educated people. We don't have to make bad decisions. There's not 1 acre of farmland in some entire states and even countries as good as the farmland in the proposed Riverwalk project area near Riverbank, or the farmland north of Turlock, or the farmland in the areas all around Modesto, Ceres here, Houston, and Salida. Stanislaus County farmland can grow food for hundreds of years because we have the best soil in the world. It's #1 prime soil. We have all the water we need because of MID and TID. They've provided us all the water for 500 years. And we have the climate. We have a Mediterranean climate here. It's the best, again, in the world. Total U.S. farmland is steadily declining as farms become subdivisions. The combination of population growth and farmland loss due to the fallowing of land in the San Joaquin Valley has resulted in an alarming decline in the amount of farmland in the Central Valley. They're going to be fallowing 900,000, almost 1 million acres south of Stanislaus County, and some of even on the east side of Stanislaus County. We don't have enough water. There is not enough water. I don't think people understand how good our farmland is. In the entire country of Japan, they only can grow 38% of the food they need to eat. They have to import 62% of their food to survive. There is an abundance of poor soils and wastelands in California for the developers to build houses on, like the Altamont Pass area or the area east of Oakdale. There's also the large landmass area west of Patterson along Interstate 5 and in the Fairfield area along Highway 12. The large acreages in these areas have poor soils or lack water or are not suitable for growing food. In our cities, we need to grow up and not out. We can build high-rise condominiums, multi-story townhouses, 3 or 4-story apartment complexes in the infill areas of our Stanislaus County cities that are in the TID and MID districts. Please do the right thing. It's everyone's responsibility to preserve this farmland so our children and descendants can have affordable food to eat and live happy lives. We are not a bedroom community for the Bay Area. We are the breadbasket for our country. We must be good stewards and conservationists for our children and descendants, since they cannot make this decision for themselves. Now is the time to save our farmland. We've got to do it now, working together. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else for public comment? Is there anybody on Zoom?
I see no hands raised at this time.
Any emails or anything?
I have not received any emails.
All right, we'll close citizens' communications. Moving on to consent calendar. All matters listed on the consent calendar are considered routine in nature and will be enacted by one motion. If discussion is required, that particular item will be removed from the consent calendar and will be considered separately. Anybody on the commission who would like a consent item pulled for further discussion? Seeing none. Anybody in the public?
See
Seeing,
no hands raised at this time.
thank you. Bring it back to the commission for a motion.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes for December 16th and February 18th.
Second.
Seeing a first and a second.
Yes, Commissioner Jamu,
Aye.
Commissioner Perez,
Aye.
Commissioner Gill,
Aye.
and Chairperson Condit.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, move on to public hearings. Item 3, get a staff report from Leah.
Thank you, Chair. This evening, we are actually going to have a presentation on the housing element with our consultant, EMC Planning. Tonight, we have Kylie Pope. And the item before you this evening will be a recommendation to the City Council for the adoption of initial study for the 2023-2031 housing element of the general plan, and a recommendation of approval of the general plan amendment to repeal the 2015-2023 housing element and adopt the 2023-2031 housing element of the general plan in compliance with state housing element law. I'm going to switch over really fast to share my screen so Kylie can begin her presentation. Give me 1 second. No.
Wow. Well, thanks for that introduction. I'm glad we got that cleared up. Good evening. I'm Kylie Pope. As Leah said, I'm a housing consultant for EMC Planning Group. I've been working on this housing element update project for a couple years now, since 2023. So I'm happy to be here tonight and to present an overview of the 2023-2031 housing element update to you all. Next slide. So tonight I'm going to cover key aspects of the housing element, including the city's regional housing needs allocation, housing opportunities and series, key implementation programs, and next steps in the process. Keep in mind, this document plays a critical role in shaping the city's housing policies over the next 8 years. Can you go to the next slide, Leah? Leah?
I don't know where the delay is, Kylie. It's changing for us. What do you see right now?
I'm sorry, I only see the title slide.
It's just the title slide.
Yeah, if you'll go to the third slide, general plan overview, that's where I'm at. Thanks, okay. So as you all may know, the housing element is an essential chapter in the city's general plan. It works alongside other elements such as the land use and community design, transportation and circulation, and so on and so forth. The housing element's required by state law, and it must be updated every 8 years. While the city doesn't build the housing directly, it does establish policies and programs that guide housing development, ensuring that the city meets state obligations while addressing local housing needs. So that's an important piece to remember. The city does not build the housing, as I'm sure the commission and council know very well. All right, next slide, please. So why does the city of Ceres even need a housing element? Essentially, it is a planning document that determines how much housing a community must accommodate. Again, this process is required and guided by state law, and it targets housing numbers set by the state. The city's role is to develop the policies and identify the locations where housing can be developed over the next 8 years. And again, the city does not build the housing. It just creates the incentives, the programs, the zoning policies, and whatnot to facilitate the housing production. So the state of California faces a significant housing shortage with an estimated need for 2.5 million homes needed statewide. Ceres is part of the Stanislaus Council of Governments region, and the state has allocated 34,344 housing units to the StanCog region alone, which includes the county's 9 cities, including Ceres. Ceres has been assigned a total of 3,361 housing units for the six cycle planning period from 2023 to 2031. And the city's housing element has to identify ways to accommodate these units. Again, that's the whole purpose of this housing element, to identify ways to accommodate those units. Did you guys hear my presentation on this slide? Can we move to the next one? Okay, so penalties for non-compliance. So making sure Ceres has a certified housing element is not just about checking a box. It's really about keeping control of local housing decisions and avoiding serious consequences. And the rules for the sixth cycle have drastically changed from the fifth cycle. Cities that don't comply with state housing laws now face tougher penalties than ever before. One of the biggest penalties, or I shouldn't say biggest, but one that a lot of jurisdictions seem to be fearful of is developers invoking builder's remedy, which essentially means they can bypass local zoning rules and build projects that may not necessarily align with the community's vision, unless the city can prove a clear risk to public health or safety. Another penalty is the courts could take away city's authority over land use decisions until the city's housing element complies with state law. And those are just a few, but I don't want to harp on these penalties because the city has already done the work and you guys have a substantially compliant housing element. So congratulations. Let's move on to the upside of compliance, and we'll stay on the slide, but I'm just going to speak a little bit. So what are the upsides to having a compliant housing element? The city has access to more funding for housing and infrastructure. So the city will have having a state certified housing element means the city is eligible for more funding opportunities, including the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities grants, SB1 planning grants, infill infrastructure grants, pro-housing design funding, local housing trust funds. The list really goes on and on. And the good news about that is the city's going to need a lot of those grants to make the implementation piece of the housing element go smoothly. So you guys are in a really good spot. Okay, next slide. So Ceres RHNA allocation breakdown. So Ceres has been assigned 3,361 housing units for the 2023-2031 planning period. As you can see in this table, these units are divided into 4 affordability categories based on area median income. So a little bit on the AMI, or area median income. That is the midpoint of an area's income distribution, meaning 50% of households earn more than the median and 50% earn less. The area median income figures are typically based on a 4-person household. Housing and Community Development updates the area median income annually for all counties using standardized methodologies. And for Stanislaus County, the area median income for 2024 was $92,600 for a 4-person household. Now, as you can see in the far left columns, we have a breakdown of those affordability categories. And then in the blue column, you'll see Ceres RHNA, right? So for instance, very low income is the households that are earning less than 50% of the area median income. So less than 50% of 92,600. And Ceres has been allocated 706 units in this income category, and so on and so forth for low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. So next slide. So housing opportunity sites. To meet the RHNA allocation, the city has identified several housing opportunity sites, including the West Landing specific plan area, which makes up the bulk of units identified in the site inventory, followed by Whitmore Ranch specific plan area, and then several vacant and underutilized sites, accessory dwelling units, and pipeline projects, totaling at 3,673 units. So let's talk a little bit about a RHNA buffer. This is really to ensure flexibility and to accommodate potential site constraints. Because it's not just about hitting the city's RHNA numbers. It's about making sure the city has enough flexibility to accommodate housing needs throughout the entire planning period. And that's where the no net loss law really comes into play and why this buffer matters. So according to the no net loss law, cities are required to maintain sufficient capacity for housing development in each income category throughout the 8-year planning period. So what this looks like is, for instance, let's say land that was designated for housing in the housing element site inventory is rezoned, or it's developed at a lower density than anticipated, or it doesn't develop at all for some reason. The city must then identify an alternative site to replace that capacity to ensure the city can still meet their RENA numbers. So HCD recommends, Housing and Community Development recommends that cities include a buffer of 15 to 30% more housing capacity than required, especially for lower income housing, since those projects are often harder to build due to financial feasibility. So historically, cities have struggled to meet lower income housing targets because it's more difficult for developers to build these projects profitably. So that's why HCD really recommends having that buffer, so that way cities aren't at risk of facing the penalties of no net loss law. So the good news is Ceres has built-in buffers across all income levels. As you can see here, there's an 8% buffer, a total of 268 units. And when it comes to building out the buffer, it's all about striking a balance, because if you have too high of a buffer, then you run the risk of sites being identified in the housing element and not developed, which would then make them subject to non-discretionary approval requirements in the following housing cycle. And if the buffer is too low, or you don't have a buffer at all, then you run the risk of being out of compliance with no net loss law, like we just discussed. All right, next slide. So to implement the housing element, the city developed various programs, and I'm just going to pick out a few to discuss, or else we'd be here all night. So first, program 1.1, no net loss. We just discussed that, so we all understand that. And if we don't, I can answer questions at the end. But essentially, that program is just there to ensure that the city does not face no net loss. And if they do, it includes provisions saying the city will identify alternative sites in the event that identified sites in the site inventory don't develop as anticipated, right? Okay, so now the next one I'd like to talk about is non-discretionary approval. So that's program 1.11. If a city previously identified a site for housing in an earlier housing element cycle, but it still hasn't developed, then HCD requires any future housing project on that site be approved through a non-discretionary process, which is a little of what I just talked about in the slide previously. So essentially, this means the city can't deny or significantly delay a qualifying housing project on that site unless there's a clear legal or safety issue. And the goal here for the non-discretionary approval is to streamline approvals and remove unnecessary hurdles for housing projects in locations that were already designated for housing in a previous cycle. And in practice, this means a jurisdiction cannot require a conditional use permit, a planned unit development permit, design review that is beyond objective design standards, or any other discretionary approval or review by the city. All right. And the next one I'll talk about is replacement unit. So program 2.5, the top of the right column. Replacement units are exactly what they sound like. It's a new housing unit that takes the place of one that was lost. Under housing and community development requirements, if a city allows a property with existing housing, especially lower income housing, to be redeveloped into something else like commercial space or higher end housing, it then has to make sure that the lost units are replaced somewhere else. This matters because the state wants to make sure we're not reducing affordable housing options while trying to meet new housing goals. So essentially, the city must ensure those homes are replaced at the same affordability level so they don't end up with fewer options for families who need them. Okay, and then the last one that I'll speak to are the last two programs, program 5.4 and 5.5 in the bottom of the right-hand column. And those are place-based programs. I just want to talk about that a little bit because a lot of planners will say, well, what does that mean? This is just state jargon. Well, let me explain it. So while it might be state jargon, it does have a meaning. It's all about focusing resources exactly where they're needed most to make them a real impact. Instead of just applying a one-size-fits-all approach across the city, you would use targeted strategies for specific areas like little neighborhoods that need better roads, utilities, investments for infrastructure or job opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So for example, in series, this could mean upgrading infrastructure in areas planned for new housing or creating incentives for businesses to set up shop in underserved neighborhoods. And essentially, the goal here is to make sure the city grows equitably and every community has the support it needs to thrive. And this will be these two programs will be key implementation programs moving forward, especially the infrastructure piece. All right, next slide. Engaging with the community has been a critical part of this process. The city has conducted several public meetings, including those shown on the screen here. Additionally, the city created a dedicated project webpage, distributed flyers, set up booths at local events, and also conducted a stakeholder survey, which I believe is an attachment to Appendix E of the housing element. Next slide. Right, yes, okay. So these are just a couple of links to the project webpage, a little clipping here of what that housing element webpage looks like, and then yes, the stakeholder survey is included in Appendix E as an attachment, if you're interested in seeing those results. Next slide. And these are the flyers that were distributed. Next slide. Thanks. So as you can see, several technical assistance meetings were held with housing and community development and city staff. This was really key to getting to the point we are today. The process was extremely collaborative and it ensures that the city's housing element meets all the state requirements. Next slide. Environmental review, okay. So as part of the housing element update, the city conducted an environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, or known as CEQA. An initial study was prepared to evaluate potential environmental impacts of implementing the housing element. And the city council will consider adopting this study to ensure compliance with CEQA and facilitate future housing development. And one key piece that I do want to point out here is that the housing element initial study CEQA document determined that the general plan EIR sufficiently covers the housing element. And this is because all housing identified in the housing element is within the city's current sphere of influence under the adopted general plan. Next slide. So here's what happened next. City Council adoption hearing is scheduled for March 24th, next Monday, I believe. And to follow that, should the City Council adopt the 6-cycle housing element, it will then be submitted to Housing and Community Development for official certification. The city will get back that beautiful certification letter. And then the implementation process for all of the housing policies will begin. It's a fun part for all of the planning staff. Okay, next slide. And finally, the Planning Commission recommendation. So tonight, the Planning Commission is being asked to recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution approving the initial study for the 2023-2031 housing element, as well as approving a general plan amendment to repeal the 2015-2023 housing element and adopt the new 2023-2031 housing element. This recommendation is a crucial step in securing housing for the city's future. Next slide. And these are just contacts for city staff that have been directly involved in the development of this housing element and getting to this point today, as well as my colleagues at EMC Planning Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So we're going to open up to the commission and the public for questions, probably commission first, then the public, and then to go back and forth, we're going to have to mute and unmute ourselves. Sorry for the inconvenience. So, we'll do it the best we can. Thank you.
All right, Kylie, thank you for the presentation. Folks on Zoom and in person, we apologize for the technical difficulties, but we'll get through it. Commission, any questions for staff and Kylie on this?
So a question, so do apartments count towards the goal, or is it only single family residences?
Yes, apartments do. They're a large part of probably meeting some of the lower income and very low income units.
Right. What about current projects that are in progress? Will they count, or is this an exclusion? So any new projects that are already taking place?
Yes, they'll count in the current cycle if they're constructed during the current cycle. So any homes we can count toward are above moderate, any apartments, anything that gets constructed in this cycle will count toward meeting this cycle's RHNA numbers.
Just to clarify, meaning 2025 forward, even if
Yes.
they've been previously approved?
Yes.
Thank you.
I do have a question on program 1.11. I think I talked to Lee about this, but the non-discretionary approval, is that a state mandate? The city has no say in that process. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I'll touch on it again in the next item, but it is something that we have been told by HCD we have to do. It is a process that says if you've identified prior sites in your cycle, so we have 4 sites that were identified in the 4th cycle, the 5th cycle, and we are reusing it in the 6th cycle because housing has not been developed. They say at this point in time, a new rule is that you have to designate those sites. If someone chooses to build 20% of allowable units as affordable, deed restricted affordable, not just saying, oh, they're affordable for the market. They have to be deed restricted units, that you have to allow them a non-discretionary approval process, meaning it will not come before Planning Commission. But I can go into that more for the next presentation. But yes, it is a state mandate. But basically, HCD is saying we have to take it with this housing element in order for them, assuming the housing element is adopted next week at council. They also want to see that this first program implemented immediately, or we would not have gotten our February 3rd letter. It was kind of a feet to the fire move.
All right, I'll take this out to the public for public comment.
Yes, Milt Treeweiler again. The issue here is that we're not taking the most important factor into account. I saw the factors. I went through, I looked not at all 850 pages, but I glanced through them. And they've got all these caveats of what you need to meet. And the most important thing is we need to eat. And to eat, we need food. And to grow food, we need prime farmland. We are sitting on the best farmland in the world. That's not even a consideration in this proposal, in this plan. And that's disaster. And who's going to suffer? The young people, not the older people, the young people. So you're the ones who should be really concerned about this. I mean, if I were one of you planning commissioners, I would vote against this. I really would, because it's not realistic. We all need to eat. We all have to have food. So why is that not a consideration? There are plenty of areas in California to build houses. We just happen to have the water for the next 500 years. There's no other place in the state that has water for 500 years because of what our ancestors did. We've got to think about our descendants. They're not going to have food, and we feed the country. It's going to be a major disaster. And obviously, this has got to be figured out. I'm not pointing at the person who put the plan together. basically they're following the laws. It's going to have to be us, the people, who make this happen. And I don't even know what question. Well, I had a question, how come you're not considering the value of the land? This is like building housing in Yosemite Valley, except we need to eat. So this is even more important than Yosemite Valley for food matters, not for beauty. I mean, there's nothing as beautiful as Yosemite. Believe me, I know that. And this is what we have to really be concerned about. And, you know, you can vote against it and see what happens. Tell them to come up with something that's really good for the future. Thank you.
John Warren, City of Ceres. West Landing, 2,000 some homes are scheduled to be constructed there. That was annexed into the city 12, 13 years ago. They haven't built one house. And I'm sure in the last update of this specific plan, there was a certain number of homes that were scheduled to be built out there. And I don't see that taking place. And one of the big reasons is there's no sewage. They have to put a pumping station somewhere there on Crow's Landing Road, and that's the city has to do that with taxpayer dollars before developers can come in and build on those properties over there that was annexed into the city. Now, why a developer doesn't come in and put a pumping station in there, if that's what's required, I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the cost, and maybe that's why the city is not involved in it. I don't have all those answers because a lot of that stuff isn't made public or the public is aware of that. So you can't build anything out there until you have sewage. And the other problem with sewage is our current wastewater treatment plant is inadequate. It can't handle the sewage for 2,000 more homes. Currently, North Modesto's or North Ceres' sewage is sent to Modesto, and then a lot of the sewage from our current plant, 1,000 gallons a day, are pumped to Turlock. There's nothing mentioned in this report about that regard, that the treatment plant is inadequate. Also, I noticed under public safety, it says that the city of Ceres is policed and receives police protection from the Ceres Police Department and the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department. Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department has nothing to do with city policing. They're in charge of keeping the peace in the unincorporated area of the county. Why they're listed there as an item is unknown. I think it's improper, and there should be a statement there, like in some of the other environmental impact reports, what their policing duties are. But it's not for the city of Ceres. Sometimes Ceres requests assistance from other agencies, and they provide that. So I noticed that. Thank you.
It's uniquely serious. Hypothetically, because everything in series is hypothetically at one point or another, these requirements mandated by the state in a time period, if those things aren't met, and it said there was a fine, and I believe it said daily. Hypothetically, again, who's going to pay for that? Do we have the money? Do we have insurance for that? Has this happened before? Or do you know of any other cities it's happened to where they've been fined all these other questions are understandable, but when it comes to getting a fine, and maybe they're gonna make an example of us someday, and I would think that Ceres doesn't have any money to spend for anything unless they have another ARPA program and put up another gazebo and take money away that we could use on that daily fine. I'd just like to know what happens in that situation if the city falls into a category where they're fined, where the money's gonna come from, and if they have insurance of some sort to protect us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment and we'll bring it back to the commission. Leah, can we get some clarification on some of those questions as it relates to the sheriff's office being mentioned in the public safety section of the housing element and city dealing with the potential fines if we do not adopt this?
Sure, I'm gonna have Ann unmute Kylie, and I'm gonna mute myself. I'm gonna defer Kylie.
Okay,
And-
thank you.
Yes, so to clarify, mention of the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department is not in the housing element. I believe the gentleman was referring to the initial study. I would have to look into that to understand further why the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department was included in the initial study, as I did not write this plan. But I can circle back on that. It's I would like to say that they're probably referencing the unincorporated area surrounding Ceres, but again, I didn't write the plan, so I'd have to look into that further.
And we can answer. We'll look into that further for council, but I believe Kylie's right. As she noted, the initial study, because we're not adding sites, we're not adding housing, we're not changing any land use designations, we're not changing any zoning designations, we're able to rely on the existing general plan. And it was probably a statement in the general plan because the general plan does have analysis involving our unincorporated areas. So I can imagine our preparer of the initial study inadvertently included that, but this housing element isn't insinuating that we're now going to use the sheriff in any way, so we can have a point of clarification next week, but I believe it's probably an inadvertent mention. And then you asked the
Mr. Yeakley's question as it relates to the fines if this is not adopted.
right, the fines would be borne by the city, I mean, the state. I'm going to also defer back really fast to Kylie, but it's harder to switch back and forth. But I don't know how many cities do not have adopted housing elements statewide, but we are the third city in Stanislaus County to at least get our letter. So I don't know what the state is going to do realistically, right? They're threatening these fines, they're threatening legal actions. In the end, yes, we would have to come up with any kind of fine money as a city because we as a city have an obligation to pass this element of the general plan. I can imagine it only comes from our reserves, annual general funds. I don't believe, I know that some beach cities have been sued by HCD, but I don't know if fines have been levied. I'm going to see if Kylie knows, so I'll switch off really fast.
I'm aware of some larger legal disputes, for instance, Huntington Beach, but theirs is a little bit different. They didn't just not have a compliant housing element. They pursued legal action with the California Attorney General. So it's a little bit different. I couldn't see a city in Stanislaus County just ignoring needing to update the housing element. Yeah, that's all I got for you.
So basically, there's the threat of fines. Has anyone actually been fined? No, but should we be fined? Yes, the city bears that burden, that cost, and it would come from our general fund.
Thank you.
So regarding West Landing, was that's already approved in the general plan?
Yes, the West Landing was adopted in 2012. So this general plan was adopted in 2018. So all of those housing units have been accounted for in this 2018 general plan, which is a 20-year document. So we were able to look at those units. Yes, they haven't been built, but that's still land that's zoned for housing. So when we look at our sites inventory, we're able to choose some of those sites. Now, we did have a difficult time because that's really the only newer area of Ceres that doesn't have development. HCD really hammered us on having a concentration of our low affordability units in one area. That happens to be the only area of town. There's some multifamily housing in Whitmore Ranch, but those units count. They are in the city. They've been accounted for in our ultimate population projections for the 2018 to 2038 year. And so we're including them in our 2023, 2031 housing elements because those are available sites in our inventory.
Any other questions from the commission? Leah, if I want to get back to the West Landing and Whitmore Ranch, those make up the bulk of the units, roughly 3,000 for just those two. What do we expect for population when it comes to those developments impacted on the city?
So if, excuse me, if those developments come to fruition, the census has us at 3.5 people per dwelling unit, which is actually very high. A more standard number is about 3.14 people per unit. So I anticipated 3,659 new residential units potentially. And if you do that by 3.51 people per unit, you're looking at a potentially adding of, 12,800 something individuals to the city. But that's assuming they develop. Again, the city is not in the business of developing housing. We, approve projects, people come to us, people decide if and when they want their property to develop. I think you might ask some more questions, but
Well, certainly those two developments will be attractive to developers. I mean, certainly.
in theory, again, West Landing has been approved since 2012. It's now 2025, and we have yet to see development. The city is working on a large infrastructure project along Crow's Landing and Service Road to spur development. No one wanted to be first in because there were significant public infrastructure lifts that, given the prices in California, it's difficult to make a project penciled. West Landing has been approved since 2018. We've been very close to seeing a housing builder purchase those lots. They have not yet. I was really hoping for my budget they would have started breaking ground this season, but they did not. So, it's all relative. Yes, they could potentially have a lot of units. We need these housing element policies to spur development. They're policies in the general plan that often are debated and not held with high regard when we bring a project forward, like reduced parking, like higher density changes. But we are trying to do things that entice developers to come and build. We're allowing, one of the programs allows smaller lot sizes. We're promoting and requiring ADUs be built with each home. In some of the West Landing area, we're updating our density bonus law. These are all programs we have to do. So between now and 2031, your planning department has to accomplish all of these policies. And in theory, they make development more attractive to developers. Things that the community doesn't necessarily like density, which we love to see density as a planner. I would love to see us build up rather than out. That's just not the reality all the time in the Central Valley. But as we allow more policies that are developer friendly, we will get more housing in those areas.
And this housing element should be consistent with the general plan. Is that correct?
It is consistent with the general plan, yes. And that's the only way we're able to rely on it for our initial study. In some cities, like what I'll talk about in the next report, but there are sites that have to be rezoned. If you're rezoning a site, then you're not consistent, right? You have to be consistent with what's there in order to be consistent. So because we didn't have to do any major land use changes or do any zoning changes, we can say that we are consistent with the general plan, and therefore we were able to use that previously approved EIR for our environmental clearance.
Does staff believe our city, as we grow in population specifically with these two projects, West Landing and Whitmore Ranch, that we will have proper public safety, sewer, water, et cetera, moving forward with these when they do eventually happen?
Yeah, so all of these sites are within our city limits, meaning we have an obligation to provide sewer and water, and we have an obligation to figure out how to do that. We are currently, the council, I believe, is entertaining a proposal for wastewater treatment plant upgrade. We're looking at ways to treat our own water, not have to send it out to other cities. So we are working on all of those items in order to accommodate, but we have a legal obligation unless the council puts a moratorium on development to provide those services. So we have to find that way. And currently there is no moratorium on development. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to build this project, we are obligated to provide sewer and water, and we have to figure out how to do that. We're obligated to meet our response times for police and fire. So we will need to make sure we are doing all of those things through whatever policies the council enact or whatever.
And I know, commission doesn't deal with those sorts of issues and really has no power when it comes to that, but I think it's important we keep those things in mind when approving items such as this. And I did speak to Chief Johnson or Acting Chief Johnson today, just to get an idea of where our police department stands on staffing. And as of today, we only have 23 patrol officers with our police department. That's not adequate for the population we currently have. The allocated patrol officers in the budget provides 32 patrol officers. Those are cops you see on the street. 2 of those positions are frozen. Right now, we're only at 23. In the general plan, it states a goal of 1.3 officers per 1,000 residents. We would need 9 new officers in addition to the 32 that are allotted and not filled. So again, it's tough for me to vote yes on items like this when frankly, the council hasn't really put the forethought into issues around public safety and our infrastructure when it comes to sewer and water. But again, I think the fees and all of that outweighs our commission, because again, we have no say in power when it comes to things like that. So I will be supporting this, but I would like it on the record from me as a commissioner, when this does go to the council, that there is a recommendation that they really start looking into issues around public safety, water, sewer, and how to properly fund those programs, if you will. Because as we continue with population growth, we're not going to have the patrol manpower to give those people a safe neighborhood. And I think that is why maybe the sheriff's office is mentioned in some of these documents, because they're literally down the street from the West Landing project. So again, it's a tough issue. Us as commissioners don't really have the power, to change anything up here other than our recommendations to the actual document itself, not these greater issues. Do you have anything, Leah, to kind of echo on that?
I just want to say that the document, the general plan, is a 20-year document. We're not even 10 years in. 2028 would be the 10th year. And these are, if the projections in the general plan would be, if everything were to build out according to the land use that it's, the color on the map. So I believe the 2018 general plan says that by 2038, our population will be 79,000 people. We're currently at 47,000. And I was in a meeting with Stan Cog for the.
Can you repeat the population one more time?
It was so remember for the as of 2015, it was 47,000 people. I believe our current population is at 48,214. So that's about 1,214 people growth since 2015. That number is from the 2019 census. That's the closest number we get. The Stan Cog local demographic and employment forecasting, the Valley Vision work that all the cities participated in September, October, noticed that they're only seeing at the height of 2050, a population in Ceres barely over 50,000. The county as a whole is also seeing a decline in population. There's a decline in population in the state of California. So we have this document, right, that was done in 2018. I think growth was on a positive trajectory. Things changed with COVID. Countywide, we're seeing a drop in population, and the statisticians that worked with Stan Cog show us barely growing in the next 20 years. That's good and bad. Good for the people who don't want growth. Bad if we want to see, our economic base develop. You need more people. You need property tax. New homes join CFD, CFDs pay for police and fire. Old homes in the city do not contribute to police and fire, yet expect the same level of service. So you need to grow to get things that you need. It's a hard concept to understand. I don't want to debate it tonight. I know we're pressed for time, but I just want to say that the document anticipates total build out. We may not be there. We're doing things to help increase our revenue. We're increasing fees for the first time since 2008, our user fees. When you're, taking care of an inspection and the inspection costs us $160 per form, but we're only collecting $100. That $60 adds up. So we've increased our user fees. We're looking to also increase our impact fees, which pays for all the infrastructure that we need. That's also a hard pill for the community to swallow, raising fees, but those are necessary things. So the city is working on being able to support a growing population, but you need more population to support growth and to support current services. So that's all if anybody else has a question, I've rambled, sorry.
Any other questions from the commission? Yeah, again, I'm going to support this tonight. I would just like it to be echoed to the council that serious action needs to be taken when it comes to public safety and other critical services when growing our population. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Get a roll call, please.
Yes, Commissioner Condit,
Aye.
Commissioner Jamu,
Aye.
Commissioner Gill,
Aye.
and Commissioner Perez.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, we'll move on to next item in the public hearing is item number 4, consideration to recommend to the city council approval of a zoning ordinance adding chapter 43, regional housing needs assessment overlap to title 18, zoning of the Ceres Municipal Code. Turn it over to Leah.
I'm going to try to load another slideshow. We know how that went. Give me 1 second. I'm hesitant to put the larger picture on for fear of it not working, so we're just going to leave it at that. Thank you, Chair. So as you noted we saw in our housing element, there is a policy 1.11 that needs to be accomplished in conjunction with the adoption of our regional, housing element, and it's what we're calling the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Overlay District. As we discussed, we've just completed the 2023-2031 housing element. The housing element is structured for consistency with the requirements set forth in state law. Essentially, the housing element, as Kylie discussed, lays out our strategy for meeting the local RHNA numbers. How are we going to do this? The city is not in the business of building housing, but can we create policies that spur development? So we have a housing element filled with goals, policies, and programs to convince HCD that we are going to be a place where housing is going to occur. And in our housing element, like I said, we have goals. Goals are long-range, broad, comprehensive targets. We have policies related to those goals that tell us, gives us guidelines on how to promote those goals. And then we have programs. How are we literally going to implement creating over 3,000 units of all the varying income levels? So we have these programs that HCD reviews scrupulously, if you will. I mean, we spend a lot of time going each and every program. How does this program spur housing in your city? And one of those programs is program 1.11, and it's a program that must be implemented concurrently with the adoption of our housing element if we wish to receive HCD approval. So I want to read the policy really quickly. Program 1.11, non-discretionary approval process for 4th and 5th cycle reuse sites. The city shall implement by right non-discretionary approval process option for cities listed with 6 cycle housing inventory per government code section 65583.2C for vacant sites previously identified in the 4th and 5th cycle housing elements and for non-vacant sites previously identified in the 5th cycle housing element when a developer builds at least 20% affordable units to accommodate the low and very low income RHNA numbers. This applies to all sites identified in the site inventory, which is found in Appendix C, and this will simplify the permitting process, reduce fees, and potential permit appeal. So what this policy is saying, it's really important. We're not rezoning anybody's property. We're not redesignating anybody's property. We are highlighting the sites that the city identified in the fourth housing cycle, which was basically years 2009 to 2014, the fifth cycle, which was 2015 to 2023. And again, we've identified it because no housing has occurred despite it being zoned and general plan for housing. The state is saying those sites, if someone chooses to build a project that contains 20% of the units as deed restricted affordable, they do not have to go through a public hearing process. They get what we call by right development. And then it goes on to say by right development basically means we can't require a CUP for the affordable units. You can't require planned unit development. You can't really offer any design objectives. Design review unless we have objective development standards, which we do not have adopted development standards in the city. And then basically any other discretionary approval that would be required of a project as defined by CEQA. So this is saying if a property owner wants to develop their property and they choose to do 20% of allowable units as deed restricted affordable, they get a free pass to not have to come to a hearing. They don't have any special permit that they have to get. They can build those units. The state wants to see if we've been identifying them since 2009 as great sites for housing. The state says we want to see you build it. How can we make it easy? Let's make it a non-discretionary approval. So there were 4 sites in our inventory that were used in the prior elements, sites 19, 20, 21, and 22. They all are zoned a PC, planned community. You'll see that they all have a land use designation of HDR, high density residential. Right here. And then which identifies how many units they could build. One of them has a neighborhood commercial land use designation. Our NC land use designation allows 12 to 25 dwelling units. You can either build commercial or you can build residential. So if any of these property owners come in and say, I want to build a housing development, and they say, I don't want to build any affordable units, cool, develop it as normal. But if they say, I want to build at least 20% of what I can get on that site as affordable, we get to give them a non-discretionary approval, get them in and out so they can get those units built, because HCD's goal is to see those units built and not sit. We'll be adding this. We're creating we have to create an overlay. So how do you create an overlay? Essentially, we're creating a chapter in Title 18, which will list these sites. And then any new site from the 6th cycle by 2035, if we haven't, or 2031, if we haven't seen development on a different site that we put in our inventory, we just do a quick zoning text amendment and add that. So then a developer or a property owner from a 6th cycle site, if they choose to come in and build 20% of their units at an affordable rate, deed restricted, they also get a non-discretionary approval to get those units built. This is not a change in land use. Again, it's not a change in zoning. So assuming that, so the way it's going to be presented to council, they need to adopt the initial study for the housing element. And then this ordinance will then rely on that document as their CEQA. Because we're not changing anything, we're consistent with the housing element. And because the housing element isn't changing any land use designation, it is then still consistent with the general plan EIR. And that is how we're finding environmental compliance for this ordinance. And then next steps, this too is going to go to City Council on March 24th for our first reading. And then they will have a second reading on April 14th. And then all ordinances are effective 30 days after adoption as of May 14th. This overlay will exist. And these properties, should a developer choose to build the 20%, a project that has 20% affordable deed restricted units, they will get basically special treatment and not have to go through a public hearing process. And just to give some context, if you had a 5-acre site and under this HDR, you could build 20 to 30 dwelling units an acre, hitting that max density. If somebody says, I want to build 150 units, that's 30%, that's 30 dwelling units an acre. If 20% of those units are deed restricted affordable, they do not come to any kind of hearing. It's a, over the counter approval, by right approval. Thank you.
All right. Any questions from the commission?
Where are some of these locations? Just Do we know?
One is off of Service in Morgan, and the other three are along Herndon, south of Plouts. Plouts, I know on the inventory map, it's hard to tell. They're all south of the storage. I believe there was a concern that we were rezoning Waldo Rose Storage. They're all south of that, on the south side of Plouts. And so 20, 21, and 22 essentially go along Herndon, and then 19 is on Service in Morgan.
And the one on Service in Morgan, that is a mixed use, correct? For commercial and,
Yeah, neighborhood commercial can have both uses.
Okay.
Commercial, so in that, just because you brought it up, if a owner or developer says, I'm not interested in building housing, okay, they're still able to build a commercial project. There's no penalty, nothing's changed. But if they wanted to not have to come to hearing, they could do a commercial project that has units on top, and as long as 20% of those units are deed restricted or affordable, they would not have to come to planning commission.
and to confirm, no changes to the current zoning?
None.
Okay. Any other questions from commission? All right, take this out to the public. Any public comment? Yes, sir.
This looks like a very interesting idea here, no hearing requirement. So it gives the developer some flexibility and some possibility of actually building and making money on a project without a lot of red tape or whatever restrictions. So one question I have is that on affordable housing, you're saying, I'm asking what is the level of affordable housing, because you have the 5 housing levels, and you know, there's really no, okay, it is dependent on income, but it's not broken into 5 different levels of income. It's only broken into 3, what I saw. So I didn't quite understand that. And the other question is, do they have any restriction if they wanted to come in and build a 6-story apartment complex? Would they be able to do that? And would they be able to do that without going through a lot of hassle? Because the big hassle with your multi-story buildings is there's a high requirement for parking, which makes it undesirable, because then you have so many parking places, you're losing a lot of your land, but then you can save land if you build up, because you do leave more land available to put in parking. But they wouldn't even have to figure that out, or how would that work out? So I think those are 3 questions, if you might have a chance to answer those for me. Thank you.
Commissioner John Warren, I understand the 20% thing. And from the previous, you have to bring those forward and they're included. My question is, their application process is being reduced. They're going to have to apply for a building permit. But my question is, the impact fees, are they going to be still required to pay the impact fees that is going to be necessary for us to build a new wastewater treatment plant? Everybody has to share in that. So there's a cost to put a sewer line in for a house, cost to put a water line in for a house. So some of those permits, $6,000 to $7,000 per unit per house. Will they still have to pay those fees? So the city will be able to provide police protection and fire protection, so forth and so on. That's my question. I understand the 20%. Maybe I should ask also, will they have to sell those properties to a specific group of people with a specific income level? So someone watches that element too. Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Leah, if you can address some of those, I took a few notes. High-rise apartment complex, if somebody wanted to build 6 stories or?
So the complex would have to adhere to our non-objective development standards, like we do have a height limit. However, if the project chooses to do 100% affordable, then you trigger other laws like state density bonus law, which allows you to get concessions and waivers. And concessions and waivers are development standards or policies that may make a project infeasible given its affordability and all the funding. So it's like a two-pronged question. Should they just want to, are they subject to the current non-subjective development standards like height? Yes. If they do something beyond 20%, there's state density bonus law, then that triggers a waiver. So it depends, right? If they're doing more than the 20, there's probably something in state density bonus that allows them to build a higher project by right still. So that does eliminate a lot of the NIMBY, not in my backyard concerns when someone wants to build a higher building. I think that's where the gentleman was getting at. Parking, you can also use a concession and a waiver to reduce the number of parking that you have to provide for affordable housing project to pencil, to get more units in, and then you get more density if you're using state bonus law. So you can have less parking, again, an issue that's often a concern for the neighborhood, but those concerns won't be voiced at a public hearing. Those are concerns that the director can kind of quell on their own without public input. So those kinds of things help development of affordable housing because those are often points of contention when it comes to a public hearing.
And again, that's a state mandate. We have no say in that.
No say.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think his other question was income levels.
And really fast.
Yeah, sorry.
We have policies that are coming up in the housing element that we want to reduce parking anyway, regardless if you're doing the 20%. That is a policy that we've committed to looking at, reducing our number of parking for multi-housing. So whether or not you're doing the 20%, should we enact that policy, which we're telling HCD that we are, you will also see less parking for multifamily development. And then yes, you have to be deed restricted means that the income levels are monitored. Most cities, well, larger cities have housing departments and they have a way to, we do it too. We verify projects that have been built with home money to verify that they are only renting to income eligible individuals. There's 5 levels of affordability: extremely low, very low, low, moderate, and above. Obviously, moderate and above would not get the reduction. They'd have to be extremely, very, and low. And those do all have different AMI, area median income levels, as found in the housing element. So they would have to have when you say deed restricted, it means you are committing to only renting to certain people. And in order to build those units, you also have a lot of federal and state reporting. You have to show that the people that you're renting to only have a certain amount of money in savings, only have a certain income each year, that they're not, hiding assets. Like, it's a very extensive report that we have to do just for home projects. We have 2 in the city, so similar reporting, similar monitoring go on of those, ideally by a housing department, but we don't have that, so by our department.
And then to Mr. Warren's question, the impact fees.
So there's no policy that says affordable units don't have to pay impact fees. I have seen 100% affordable projects request that fees be deferred in a different way, because the way loans are structured on affordable housing projects, it works out better if they have deferred payment on those impact fees. But if this is a project, like I said, of the 150 units and only 20% are affordable, the remaining I think 50% was 30. So the remaining of the 120 that aren't affordable, of course, are going to pay impact fees. If the 30 units that are deed restricted would need some sort of concession on impact fees, maybe deferred, I'm sure that would be something to consider, because again, we need those units built.
Any other questions from the commission? Lee, I had a question on lot 22. It's the old farm labor camp. How many units do you expect out of an area like that?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I did not write that acreage down.
Okay.
Of that lot. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And I know you said to be prepared.
I'll loop back around with you on that. Any other questions, Commission? All right, well, I'll be looking for a motion to approve.
I mean, taking a look at it, I don't see anything where it's restrictive for us, so I motion to approve.
Second.
Get a roll call.
Yes, Commissioner Jamu,
Aye.
Commissioner Perez,
Aye.
Commissioner Gill,
Aye.
and Chairperson Condit.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, moving on to public meetings, seeing none, unfinished business, none, matters initiated by the planning commission and staff, none, reports. Anybody got a report on the commission? Leah, I just had a question on the council commission workshop that got scheduled for April 8th. Is that just going to be similar to the last one we had last year? Is there any idea of what that's going to look like?
I have not been given a heads up. I just wanted to, it kind of ties into what I was gonna say. I will be leaving the city at the end of the month, so I don't know who's been planning that, but I am not sure what's.
You will not be involved,
not
obviously.
be involved.
Okay. All right. Any other reports? Julian, you got anything? You sure? It looks like you want to say something. No. All right. Well, I apologize to everybody on Zoom and in attendance for the technical difficulties, but we got through it. And with that, I will adjourn to our next scheduled planning commission on April 7th. Thank you.